What does it mean to actually see God? And who gets to see God? That was the heart of our sermon yesterday as we continued in our series, A Blessed Life, a series looking at the Beatitudes from Jesus Christ. This morning's Monday morning Devo looks back at yesterday's sermon and dives deeper into the message. And yesterday's message, once again, was the idea that the pure in heart see God. In fact, that's what Jesus himself said in Matthew 5:8. Blessed are the pure in heart. It can also mean happy, by the way, when you say blessed. But blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And what does it mean to actually see God? Now, a lot of times I think in movies and in art, seeing God is something extraordinary, something that's awe-inspiring. And it can definitely be that. We have those moments in our lives now, and I think we will have those moments forever, because God is someone who deserves our reverence, and we are staying in awe of God in every single way. But to see God is also to live in the reality of God, to live in the reality of the kingdom, to see God moving all around you in your life and the lives of others, and then how you can connect those dots to do God's work here and now. And then, of course, we go on to be with him for all eternity. But this all comes down to the concept where Jesus says, the pure in heart. The people who see God are the pure in heart. And for the ancients, and even for us today, when we talk about the idea of the heart, we're not talking about the literal heart. We're talking about the spiritual heart. In many ways, the core of who we are. I said yesterday in the sermon that the spiritual heart is kind of a place where we either meet God or reject God, or whether we accept God or reject God. Meaning that God is supposed to be the center of our lives. And when he's not, we usually replace it with someone else. And something else, by the way. It could be someone. But we usually replace it with something or someone else. And typically that leads to a divided heart. Some people completely reject God altogether and just move on. But most people go through life trying to do God's will on one hand, and then trying to do their own will or the will of someone else or something else on the other hand, and then their heart becomes divided. And you cannot have a pure heart if you have a divided heart. And I said this yesterday, that a heart divided is a life distracted. That you are distracted in this life when your heart is not centered on the things that are most important and not centered on God's will for your life. We all know this in practical things, that when you're trying to stay focused on something and yet you're focused on something else at the same time, and you're divided with your attention, you're divided not only with your mind but with your heart, right, the core of who you are, that you never end up doing what you need to do. You never accomplish what you need to accomplish. You never give the effort you need to give because your heart's divided. Well, it's the same way with God. But it leads to a life distracted, because you're always kind of being taken away from the things of God because you're also wanting something else. You're also wanting to go down another path, or to fulfill your life with things that ultimately will let you down. A heart divided is a life distracted. But that heart divided leading to a life distracted leads to something even worse. And I would say it's this, that a heart divided is also a life dissatisfied. That you cannot be satisfied in this world, here and now, if you are not focused on the only thing that brings ultimate satisfaction, and that is God. Now, don't get me wrong. There are things in this life that lead to immediate and temporary satisfaction and seem to fulfill us. But then that fulfillment goes away, and we need to fill it with something else. We need to fill our lives with something else. And once again, our hearts are often divided. We say to ourselves, hey, I know I need to do God's will, but hey, I want to do this over here. And sometimes we're even confused on where it is divided. And that's where the purity concept comes in. Because the pure in heart are focused on the things of God. And it doesn't mean they always know everything about God in relation to their life. It just means they're constantly seeking to do God's will. It's a humble way of living. It's a kind way of living. It's a convicted way of living. And it doesn't mean you have all the answers all the time. It just means That as you walk along this journey with God, you're constantly seeking to do God's will and asking the questions that would lead you to follow in the path of Jesus instead of somewhere else. And your heart is not divided. It is focused on Jesus. Will you make mistakes? Will you get it wrong sometimes? Absolutely. But your heart is in the right place. And therefore, you are not distracted, and you are ultimately not dissatisfied, because you stand in the satisfaction that comes from God and God alone. That, to me, is what purity in heart is all about. And that's what it means to see God. When your heart is focused on God, when your heart is focused on Jesus, when your heart is focused on the Holy Spirit, when your heart is focused on following in the footsteps of Jesus and living in the reality of the kingdom, that means you have a pure heart. And that is when you see God all around you. Sometimes in awe-inspiring ways, and sometimes in the most ordinary ways, which, by the way, are often the most extraordinary moments in our lives. But it's the pure in heart that see that. I hope and pray you have a great Monday, and I hope and pray you have a great rest of the week. God bless you.